Might as well.
We can, I mean, Nikki can start with the treasurer's report and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, let's get started.
And then when Joe gets here, we'll officially call the meeting to order and.
Yeah, what time's the
6.
Upstairs is 6, yeah.
Okay.
So we'll jump ahead.
No call to order.
No call to order. No public comment, no minutes. We can
No public comment even?
No, because we'll do that when we call the meeting to order so that it's officially on the record.
Okay.
We don't have a
But I don't see anybody here.
big crowd.
I know, it's a finance meeting, I'm still waiting.
Some don't. I told you. Be
I've only got,
careful.
what do I have, 7 months left? Okay, Nikki, do you want to go through?
To see what we can stir up for you
Yeah.
in terms of controversy.
Oh, God.
Okay, so tonight's agenda for the big audience that we have here. Are we recording? No, we're not.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so we'll be going through the August treasurer's report, the CIP update, and then this is the preview of the financial forecast. So we'll go through some of the assumptions and the items that we're looking at now.
Well, Joe's here, so we
Okay,
can
I'm gonna pause for a moment.
All right.
do all the things.
We're official. All right, Phil, can I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Bree.
Yep.
Trustee Hallwax. Trustee Rubin is absent, so we have a quorum.
All right. Any public comments? Anything changed since?
Seeing none.
All right, can I have a, well, anything in the minutes? Yeah, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
So
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Okay.
All right, Nikki, fire away.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so moving into August financial report. So we are 8 months
Keep that
into the
open
year.
partially.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
66% into the year. Revenues are still strong, although we did not receive any property tax distributions this month, which should surprise no one. Still waiting on the bills to be issued. If you look at the financial forecast or the financial projections in the monthly financial report, we are starting to dig into fund balance, about $2 million. Again, this is expected. We can absorb it. But it is a direct result of the county delay in their issuance of the second installment of property taxes. We are still anticipating getting all that revenue this year. We're hopeful that that will happen. But again, this month we saw nothing. With income tax, that continues to be higher than last year. It's very high compared to year-to-date budgets. And then our permit revenue is a little stagnant. It's above where we would, about where we would expect in terms of budget. It's a little behind last year. And then our places for eating continues to perform very well. It's at 73% of budget. When we look at 8 months of this year compared to the same 8 months last year, we're about $10,000 higher. So comparing apples to apples, we're in really good shape in terms of comparing year over year.
Is there any, I mean, do we hear anything about property tax bills, or is it just we're waiting and hoping?
From the county, you mean?
Yeah.
There haven't been actually any official communications that we've received from the assessor's office, or I should say the treasurer's office. All we've gotten have been kind of the public statements that have been made from the president's office and others. So it is still anticipated, based off of what we're hearing, that those bills will go out probably late in November with a due date by December 31st. So about a 30-day window there, which is a typical thing. It's just we usually have that happen in September. So, or August, actually.
Do you know they have a strong incentive to get
Yes.
them out by December from many agencies? And we continue to get notifications for their bridge funding, although we're not eligible for it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many communities are actually taking them up on that.
Why
because
aren't we eligible?
Yeah, and what is the bridge funding?
So the county created a program for municipalities that need help in terms of cash flow, where you could borrow from them. They
Right.
grants the money to you. It's a 0 interest loan, but you have to have less than 6 months in reserve or 3 months in
I
reserve.
think it's less than 3 months in reserve, and yeah.
And your credit rating has to be equal or lower than the counties. And since we're AAA rated and we have quite a bit in reserves right now, because of our general obligation bonds, and we've also been saving fund reserves, we're not eligible to participate.
Banks are doing loans, right?
Banks could do loans
It's
as
the
well.
same,
There
my
are
old
local
guys at
banks.
PNC are doing tons of.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Wintrust, we bank at North Shore Community Bank. They did offer as well.
That wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, I mean, the county's bridge loan fund is $500 million. It's large. And as Nikki said, it's intended to be a low cost option, but being preferable to communities that have
Makes sense.
bigger issues than we do.
We're glad we don't qualify.
Right. It's a good problem.
But they do continue to extend the deadline.
Yeah.
So I have a
Ah.
feeling that there are not a lot of people that are taking advantage of it. I don't think there's a lot of people that qualify, quite honestly. So that's also.
I think
a good thing.
that's true. Yeah.
What is the credit rating of the county?
I think they're A
Double
minus.
right, yeah.
I think they're A minus, something like that. No, they might not be. It might be B.
I think they're an A.
Are they still an A?
Category.
Yeah.
Not a triple. On the water fund side, volumetric revenues are starting to tick up. They're still lower than last year, but they're higher than what we were hoping for in terms of year-to-date budget. Our fixed charge revenue is starting to recover. It's really kind of been lagging. But that's starting to come back up. We've had a few change outs to larger meters. That's certainly helped that fixed charge revenue. Still expecting that will come in within budget in the water fund. Couple items to note here. This is the second month in a row that we've seen a slight decrease in sales tax. It is small, it's only 3%, not anything to be concerned about, but we do think that it's starting to level off. We're just starting to take a deeper dive into where our sales tax revenue is coming from. And I know we've had conversations with this group in the past about, is it all automotive sales? Where is it coming from? And our largest growth areas are in clothing stores, furniture and flooring, housing appliances, household appliances, sorry. And then we're also seeing a large jump in restaurants because we've really had success there. There's a category called agriculture and livestock, but it also includes fresh produce, fresh meat. That's a lot of your home delivery services. So the good news about those categories jumping so high is that we think that's going to be a permanent change in our sales tax level because that's really related to that destination sourcing of the sales tax. So that is good news that we're seeing more diversity in our sales tax sources. And then it's going to be somewhat permanent. So what we'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes when we talk about the financial forecast, we still have some modest increases in there, but we are kind of expecting that it'll level off at this new level.
Do you know the split between online and local?
Not yet. We've only started to scratch the surface, but we will be able to see that because the sales tax information from the state does tell us if it's the entity that's remitting sales tax is what they call a destination point or a permanent location or a changing location.
So these breakdowns include both.
It includes
So,
both.
okay.
But some of the categories like furniture, flooring, household appliances, because we don't have a physical presence here where people would be ordering from a store within Glencoe, we know it has to be from online.
Yeah.
So that's good news.
I think, and we'll get into
Nice.
this.
Chickens. We do have chickens.
We'll
But
get
I
in-
don't think that's
We
a
don't want to be,
common.
if people are eating them, we have to do some increase.
But this is not inflation justified. So if we were to take year on year, and let's say inflation's up round numbers 10%, in theory, people are consuming less stuff. It's just but the same dollar amount at a higher price. So I mean, we have to expect that given what's happening.
And I think, as we look into these and we'll talk more about it as we get into the financial forecasting process, things like restaurant sales and Nikki's looking at it over time, right? We're looking at it over a period of 5 or 6 years. We're seeing not insignificant growth from that kind of low water mark of 2015, if we use that as the date, to present. What was it? Nearly 70%, of a 70% increase in that category
In restaurants.
in restaurants. So those kinds of, that's not a surprise, I think, as we see, you know, the downtown really be a vibrant spot, but it also underscores kind of strength of that particular aspect of the local economy.
Is gas included in this?
That has its own category.
The only reason, I mean, so to Joe's point, if inflation would actually help this number. So
Correct.
it's even worse than just the down 3%. As if we're looking at it just from an activity perspective.
You have to expect it at some point. People spend a lot of money.
Oh, no, I'm
Now
just
they're
saying,
gonna go back to work.
I'm not, there's no judgment, just saying it's a little worse than
Yeah.
3%.
Yeah, I think, you know, looking at, again, the lag, you know, May sales coming in August. I think there's, what we'll do as we dive deeper into it is, you know, auto sales have been weird, right? You have these gluts that get met and then shortages. And so sometimes you've got this bounce up and down. Supply chain issues continue to be a thing in the automotive industry.
Probably was cars, because that was. when-
There was definitely high performing area. So I do think, Joe, to your point, at some point it has to level off. I mean, we were seeing
Yeah, those numbers
a
up
bounce back
at the top
that
there are
was
nuts.
dramatic. And a lot of that was bounce back, right? As we saw from
Year-on-year comparison.
pandemic
COVID year.
and then bouncing back through that. But it still remains strong. I think that's a good thing, and we'll want to make sure that we keep a very close watch on it. But I think online sales has really been the and it hit right at the right time. You know, that legislative change took place in 2019, just prior to the pandemic, when everybody switched to buying everything online, it seems like. So we'll keep watching that, but that's definitely been an area of strong performance for us.
And when we're going to continue to take a deeper dive into sales tax to really understand where all of these things are coming from. And our thought process was to start with pre-pandemic levels to kind of understand where we were before COVID and then where we are today.
Online versus stores would be great.
Yes.
Okay. The other thing I was going to mention on sales tax is we're in the middle of the sales tax suspension at the state level on groceries. We did get notification from the Department of Revenue that they have some concerns about how retailers are handling this. This isn't a major impact for us, but because of the delay in how long it takes for us to get sales tax information, we won't be able to verify if it's being done correctly in Glencoe for a few months. The state has sworn to us that they are going to make us whole for anything that we would lose based off of the suspension.
Remind me
But
what
there-
this is.
So as of July 1st, the sales tax on groceries has been suspended for the rest of the year statewide. So the state did that. Retailers are supposed to report those sales to the state like their taxable sales, and then they're just not supposed to be collecting on it. So what they're finding is some retailers are continuing to collect, some retailers are not reporting what they should be, which is making it hard for them to determine how to make people whole. So it's kind of a mess right now, but they're trying to straighten that out, and they've asked for our help to try and make sure that everything looks normal. So that'll be something that will come in a couple months. Let's see, from a revenue budget impact, taking a look at projections through the end of the year, we're projecting that the general fund might come in over budget by $892,000. That's just on the revenue side. That also assumes that we're going to get all the property taxes. So that we're going to continue to watch as we hear more from the county. On the water fund, that summer usage is coming in and it's really helping us. We're projecting that the water fund will come in $309,000 over budget on the revenue side as well. So that's good news. Local impacts, we're still continuing to see supply chain disruptions. As of the writing of the monthly financial report, we were still waiting on 3 pieces of equipment from Public Works, but we just received our hot box trailer that came in on Friday. So as Don Kirk says, hot asphalt for everyone. He's very good. So, but we are still waiting on those other 2 pieces of equipment. We're hoping to get those this month. We're continuing to see, we still do not have the public safety squads, golf course repair parts, and we're still seeing increases in automotive report parts just to repair the equipment and the vehicles that we have. On a whole, year-to-date commodities and contractual services have now flipped. They are higher than this point last year, which is what we would expect with inflation. But we are still under budgetary targets. So we're still monitoring that, making sure that we don't exceed our budget. So we're not concerned about it at this point, but it is what we would expect with inflation being where it's at.
Real quick, relative to, as we're preparing budget, I've been talking with Dave and his team, and we've been contemplating the appropriate way to try to budget for replacement vehicles on a going forward basis. There are certain specialty vehicles right now that are obnoxiously long lead times, 4 years in some cases.
I had 30 months was the longest I remember.
Well, we've seen, we were talking to our friends at the Village of Winnetka who have some very, very specific specialty vehicles for their electric department. They're looking at like 2027, 2028 potentially for some of those vehicles, which is just, it's goofy. It doesn't even make any sense. After a while, you just kind of say somebody's just taking advantage of the supply chain problem. But what we are contemplating is the appropriate way to budget for vehicle replacements on a going forward basis. In some cases, we're seeing, depending upon the type of vehicle, you can place an order to put yourself in line with an expectation that it's at least a 24 to 36 month lead. At month 18, you may have a chance to opt in or opt out. So you can either continue forward and at that point sign a contract or execute the financial impact of that contract, or not and pull out of it. We've had some success at shopping, essentially going around and seeing what we could find on a dealer lot, which works to some degree. But as we get into our aerial lift trucks in the Public Works Department, the part lead time on those components is very, very long. So we may or may not be able to. And as you may remember, we have one of them budgeted for replacement this year. We know that's not happening. We may have to budget as we try to work our way through a budget process without a real sense of when those dollars will actually be expended.
So if we did order one, are we paying for it up front, or is it?
Most of the time it's a deposit that is placed, or at least a purchase order. That's the weird thing. It's not such a big deal if you're talking about 12, maybe 18 months. But if you're talking about 36 to 48 months, you are binding future boards in a way that really we have a bit of a problem with. So that's an aspect of how we're going to work with the lawyers as to how we can appropriately structure that with a resolution that the board may authorize, and having an ability to back out of it in the future if pricing goes up too much, if there are other options that become available, becomes important at that point. So we're going to continue to look at that. It's just unique right now, the way these lead times are coming. And most cases, you can't even place orders. The manufacturers aren't accepting any orders at all, depending upon the vehicle that you're talking about. So I'm grateful, for instance, that we got the Vector when we did, because I don't know that we'd be able to get that. It becomes more concerning, I think, as we start looking at the larger public safety equipment. We're still 2 or 3 years out from anything, I think, ambulance replacements, engine replacements, things like that. Those are always long leads. Now they're just doubled.
So we've got like a priority list of things, and you can have people called scavenging out
Yeah.
Looking for other supply chains, right?
Yeah, well, and I think the problem with specialty vehicles is that they're specialty, so you often can't find them.
Right.
So if, for instance, we were buying a fire engine, our fire engines are spec'd to some degree based on the size of the bay that we have. And so those are custom built, custom sized, custom weight, all those kinds of things. And so when you're talking about those types of vehicles, what was at one time a 12 to 14 month lead may be a 36 to 48 month lead. So where I think we have to be conscious of that as we're building out the budgets, that we may have to place orders earlier than we anticipate because the actual receipt date may be well past what we would anticipate. It's a unique time, and I don't think we've ever seen that from the standpoint of equipment replacements and things like that. So even the squad cars, I mean, the board approved that contract in December. We thought we'd have them by August. It's now, we'll hope to have them in December. And at the same time, Winnetka put an order in February, and they got their squad cars delivered last week. I don't know why that happens. And I think to some degree, you know, I think there are different dealerships that they're coming through and different state contracts, but that's also happening where certain lines, I don't think people are hopping lines, but things just aren't, they're not lining up as they normally would. So it's just to give you a little peek under the tent as to the complexities of some of these equipment acquisitions. It's fun, makes it more interesting.
Personally, I wouldn't worry about putting undue commitments on future boards. Future boards are going to have to understand that this is a strange time.
Can we keep things running? I mean,
That's,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're working on it. I think that's the plan, right?
Cuba did.
They still
I
do.
mean, you know, the answer is
we're
of
all
course
just driving around little bugs.
Of course we can.
Yeah.
You know, Cuba did it for 50 years,
Yep.
so you can, just not ideal. That's why we have Dave.
Cuba factor, I like that.
Checking that one.
Okay. Turn it over to Stella, to talk about the golf. Finance report.
August was a very good month. Great weather. We were 1,000 rounds over budget. And now year to date, we're over 3,000 rounds over our budget. Revenues in August were $44,000 over budget. So a very happy month for me. And we had quite a few activities going on. We wrapped up our summer camps. We had a Wednesday evening league that was really popular, over 60 members. We have all the high schools that started in August. And I don't know if you're aware or not, but Winnetka is almost closed, and they will be closed for 2 years. So we have people clamoring to try to get out, and we just don't have the room. We're at capacity for the 3:30 to now. You can't really tee off later than 4:30 if they're trying to get 9 home matches in. So next year is going to be very interesting. High demand is expected. We've been working on our budget, and obviously our rates are going to reflect that high demand, so we can take advantage of that. Friends of the Glencoe Golf Club has been working very hard. We have 2 more $10,000 commitments. They have engaged a marketing person to do a sort of rebrand for friends, to call it the Club at Glencoe, to incorporate all of the other amenities besides golf that this clubhouse will bring to the community. Try to keep it less golf centric, because it really isn't. It's more about the building and the surrounds and everything that it will add to the property. So they hope to have that content and an upgrade to the website done within the next 3 weeks. And there is a board meeting for friends scheduled for next week. We did have a nice conversation with somebody who is potentially going to be a new donor. And we discussed some pretty high levels. I did reach out to him today. I haven't heard back, but the way we left it was very positive. So as soon as I hear back on that, fingers crossed, I will let everyone know.
So just the clubhouse as it currently stands, if we have 2 years where Winneck is closed, theoretically have a lot more traffic. Are we okay? I mean,
Well, the building, the plumbing is a reflection of traffic. The building itself is going to deteriorate at the same, level that it has been, regardless of how many people are coming in.
right,
So
but just will we be functional for 2 years?
I can't make that prediction. I mean, I do anticipate we're going to have to spend some money on electric. Currently, I can't keep the lights on in one of the locker rooms. So I have an electrician coming out tomorrow. Things like that have been, if you just flick it 100 times, it'll stay on. Those tricks aren't working anymore. So we're gonna have to start spending some money. Definitely. I'm predicting that plumbing is the next thing that we're gonna have to spend some money on. I don't know how much this electric is gonna cost us, but those essentials were definitely beyond the end of its life. So we'll be band-aiding as much as we can, because I still contend I don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in a building that's going to be torn down. So we'll stay operational. We are at the end of our contract with our food provider as well. So we just put out an RFP. It's going to be very difficult to attract anyone to operate out of the kitchen just because of the condition of it. Everything in there is really hard to operate. It's very small for any kind of a business that hopes to maybe do catering as well as a day-to-day business. It's going to be a challenge for sure. So we have all of that in mind moving forward, and our capital plan will reflect some investment in the infrastructure to keep us operational. But we are anticipating that, as long as the weather cooperates, we should have 2 more good years. But then we're out of golf courses because we had Wilmette, we had Highland Park, we had Northbrook, and now Winnetka. So it's our turn.
To add, just as a kind of an endpoint on that, we do have a date scheduled for a more detailed conversation relative to the clubhouse on October 20th. After we bounced around trying to find a special date, that's the regular committee of the whole date for October. So we may actually meet at the golf course for that meeting and then come back here for the regular board meeting afterwards. But that's on the calendar.
It'd be like a Halloween haunted house.
It could be.
No decorations needed.
Scary enough.
And do we have a plan for what we will do when there's some clubhouse? Are we going to close? Or do
No,
we think
absolutely not.
maybe-
No.
Yeah.
We've anticipated a decline in play because we'll be under construction, but the golf course will stay operational.
And are we just putting
Trailers.
Trailers. I mean, are we at the point where we have to start considering doing that without having a plan?
We'll talk about that in
No,
October.
I don't.
Okay.
Thank you, Stella. Okay, moving on to our CIP updates.
Good evening, members of the Finance Committee. This evening, I'm presenting the September CIP update. Your schedules can be found in your packet. The September update is on page 56, 55, and 56. The quarterly update's on page 57. And then on the schedules, the changes are highlighted in blue. So the project start date to relocate the Beach Road storm sewer outfall is moving to October of 22 from September. Sidewalk tractor number 55 that was approved by the Board of Trustees in December of 2021 is scheduled to arrive in October of 22. This was delayed 1 month from September. The PW admin vehicle number 7 that was approved by the Board of Trustees in December of 21 arrived in August of 22 instead of the adjusted arrival date of September 22. So to Phil's point, it's a little unsteady in when things are arriving. The patrol vehicle replacements number 650 and 662 that were approved by the Board of Trustees in January of 22 are now scheduled to arrive in December instead of September of 22. The water main replacements project will come before the Board of Trustees at a later date to be determined. We talked about those in previous meetings. The March 2022 manhole rehabilitation project was finally completed in August of 22, which that's good news. And the traffic signal controller modifications project will be presented before the Board of Trustees for approval in October of 22. And so it's staff's here and available if you have any other questions.
I have a quick question on page 56, when we look at the approved budget versus contract award amount. Are we having to manage what through commodity prices, supply chains? Because there's some things here where, you know, approved budget 80 and then contract award amount 208, but then there's one near the storm sewer approved 1.88 and it's 1.52. So are we having wildly different from what we approved to what we're actually seeing because of labor, supply chain, commodities? It just seems like in net it's fine, but some of it certainly seems that some of there's some big variances.
I could answer those specific two, Phil, if you want.
Yeah, please.
The storm sewer one was just, that was our large project that's underway now, that was awarded in April, that we've got good competitive prices. That was a placeholder, and those are bond funds, so
Right.
an unused portion will roll into plans for next year. And then the 80 to 208 is the Green Bay Trail crossing. That was when the dust finally settled on what our total project was. That's an 80-20 match. So our local share was a placeholder as well in that increase. But no, I mean, those are both good competitive results.
I mean, net
Those two
it's
projects.
4.6 versus 4.2 awarded, so net
Yeah.
you're doing fine. I was just curious if this is reflective of trying to navigate a difficult environment to just trying to estimate costs.
Really, the only project that we were a little surprised by bid prices was the water main. And so we've deferred that. We've got some ideas on how we'll bring back the residential portion. The lagoon main is off and running this fall, so.
And then the can't remember what it's called, the safe passages or
Safe routes to
Safe routes to
Is
school.
that project?
Trying to get timing is here, trying to get an update on where we stand. That one way or the other, that's gonna get completed in 2023. It won't happen this fall because we're kind of at the mercy because it's state funding. It'll be on a state letting and they're a challenge to work with for certain projects. That one's been one that has been on our radar. We've talked with the state senator's office. We're not alone with projects with the state being delayed, and so.
IDOT is dramatically understaffed right now. And there are projects all over the state, and this is a small one.
Yeah.
Small ones are to some degree easy to kick. But it's not just small ones. Lake Forest waited on a $12 million project to the point at which they almost lost the grant funding if they didn't commence construction, and they commenced construction before IDOT actually gave them the authority to do so that they didn't lose the money. That was a subject. President Rowan and I were at a meeting with our state senator and two representatives a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. And that was a subject of some contention that municipalities are just frustrated by the absolute snail's pace that IDOT is operating under. And so the Safe Routes project is a great example of something that seems easy, straightforward, why it doesn't get included on a bid list it's a $150,000 project. And it sits on our books for 4 years, and it'll be 5 years by the time it's actually completed. So it's a lot of head scratching. Some of it is pandemic related. IDOT has always been slow, but they are woefully understaffed right now. And that's just making it that much worse.
And then the asphalt, we're all good there? Repaving is
Finished.
done?
We are done with all the core work. It's punch list at this point, so.
Yeah, the contractor really jumped to it once asphalt was available again. They were impressively on it. And so there's a lot of streets to get done, but they look great. They look great.
Yeah, so last item. So this is where we talk about the forecast before we have the forecast. So for those of you, I think all of you have been through this before, we do a 5-year forecast as part of the budget kickoff process. This forecast will go through from 2023 through 2027. And we are generating assumptions that we will use to generate the full forecast. This is very, very preliminary because we haven't seen the budget requests be finalized from the departments yet, and we're still working on our capital requests for a variety of reasons, a lot of them we just discussed. So this will still change based off of the more like additional information that we receive down the road. But the assumptions that we have in the packet tonight, it's on packet pages 58 to 63. And it's based off of a variety of critical factors, current economic conditions, which have been a little wild recently, existing financial policies that we just talked about in previous finance committees this year, state, federal, and county regulations. We've added the county to the mix this time around because now they typically do not impact us, but now we're starting to see different. And then any other known budgetary impacts that we will be facing. On the revenue side, included in the assumption so far is a 5% rise in property taxes. Again, that's something that we'd recommend revisiting once we have all of the budgetary numbers in place. We have been trying to find a reliable predictor of inflation and what CPI is going to be. It's going to be a little bit of a toss of the coin. Yes, definitely higher. So what's included in the initial financial forecast assumptions are projections that was done by the Congressional Budget Office. But I also looked at Deloitte put out a publication, Deloitte Insights, and then the Conference Board information that we got through the Illinois Municipal League. From a water fee adjustment, the last couple of years we've committed to really looking at what was in the water rate study versus what we're seeing come in through the new water meter technology. We are able to capture more water than we were previously. We've also been fortunate with fairly dry conditions. So just on a preliminary basis, the water rate study was recommending a 7% rise in 2023. Preliminarily, we're recommending a 5% rise, but that could change depending on what we plan to do with water infrastructure, especially based off of where the bids just came in. But that's included as a placeholder today.
So for the water, we originally set out a 7% increase and then we've lowered it to 5%. But we've always talked about 7, correct? Or have we started talking about 5? Did we start to talk about 5?
We haven't talked about 5, that's new. Last year, we backed off, I think it was a 1% or 1.5%
Yeah,
from
because
what
of,
the water rate study had indicated.
primarily because of ARPA funds that we had received from the federal government. That we thought we could utilize those in the water fund to offset the capital needs that we would have. I think the question, and to Nikki's point with this number, is we're going to be sitting down between now and the next time we see you in October and going through the entirety of the budget that the departments are putting together. This is going to be one that we talk about quite a bit because we'll start some of that conversation tomorrow night with respect to the lead service line mandates that the federal government is going to, or has already set forward what those costs and impacts might be. We do know, as Nikki said, that the general cost of replacements are going up. We also have a never-ending need overall throughout the community to make sure that we are appropriately planning ahead. We've taken some things away from the near term, like the water tower. A replacement water tower was anticipated, I think, in 2025. And now with the lagoon main replacements, that is put off at least a decade. That changes some of the calculations that we have because we had built in a $5 million expenditure for that. If we don't do that in 2025, and I don't anticipate we will recommend it, that could lower the necessity of a rate increase. That being said, we're going to look at it. This is a very preliminary number at this point. And then we may come back in October and November and say, you know what, we've looked at it again and 7% is probably the right number. We just want to be conscious of the overall impact.
We
To
don't
the,
want to go too high if we don't
Right.
need the money, but
Right.
we also don't want to short ourselves if
I'm just trying, I mean, we issued revenue debt already. You know,
Yeah.
Always talks about something.
and I anticipate, I don't remember the revenue or the debt issuance cycle again in the water fund. Again, it changed because the water tower timeline has changed significantly. But there are other factors that may come in,
The water main underneath was 2 million-ish,
right?
but that wasn't budgeted.
But 1.2 of that was received from the federal government. So we moved those ARPA dollars right into the water fund as soon as we received them. So it was a pretty significant offset of that overall expenditure. But the moral of the story is we're going to come back to you with a number that is much more close to final in terms of a recommendation next month.
And then very similar story with sewers. Sewer fees will be recommending rate increases based off of what we think will happen with capital improvements. And then sales taxes are obviously leveling off. We want to be, and the forecast doesn't have them decreasing. It does have them increasing, to your point, with inflation. We do think that it'll still increase, but it's very moderate in the forecast until we can finish that analysis. Continuing on revenues, we do have additional projections based off of information from IML and CPI factors on income tax has a slight increase or slight decrease in the forecast going forward. Both income tax and personal property replacement tax have slight declines programmed in them. The reason being that, I hate to say this out loud, but there is a possibility of a recession coming, or at least a retraction on spending, depending on what happens with inflation. So we are kind of adjusting. Use tax, we expect that to continue to decline, and we see that we're expecting use tax to decline while our sales tax continues to increase. Motor fuel tax, we are losing the Rebuild Illinois Fund money. That was a 3-year program that was programmed for $191,000 above and beyond what we normally got. So that's going to look like a painful drop in this financial forecast. But we will take into account fuel taxes and where those are headed as well. The general collection services fee is also a significant revenue in the general fund. As you probably remember, that contract is under negotiation. It expires in October. So we expect to have a better anticipation of where that fee will go when we settle that contract. Okay. On the expenditure side, no surprise to anyone, contractual and commodity costs are rising, and we continue to have supply chain disruptions. So those expenditures will also be adjusted as we get a better idea or try to guess a little bit better of when these things will be delivered, when the funds will be expended. We do have CPI forecast programmed into expenditures for forecast as of today. We're anticipating pension costs in accordance with our new policy, so those are projected out. These are on last page of the packet. Going with our policy for 2023, your pension contribution is anticipated to be just over 2.6 million. That will rise to 3 million in 26, and then we're anticipating that leveling off at 2.9. That'll be dependent ultimately on demographics, what happens. We continue to see, unfortunately, a changeover in public safety, but with that comes more tier 2 employees. There's no guarantee with that because we're also doing lateral transfers. So it depends on where the lateral transfers come from. We talked about that last month. But as we add more tier 2 employees, that normal cost of operating the pension does go down. So there's a potential that we could see leveling off come sooner. There's also the unanticipated impact, or I guess unknown impact of investment consolidation and what that will mean in terms of returns. If we do start to see efficiencies, cost savings, and additional revenue in the market from that consolidation, then that could also decrease our contribution. So this is, I don't want to say a worst case scenario because the market is not doing well and that could hurt us as well. But that's what we're planning for, at least for the next 5 years.
And our salaries, is this union contract most, or most of the salaries related to whatever union contract we have right now with public safety and with.
Yeah, two-thirds of the workforce is under one of the two collective bargaining agreements. So yes is the answer.
And it's out to 20, how long is it?
Public safety is through the end of next year. Public works is through the end of the following year. Correct.
So that, you read my mind because that leads me to my next slide. There, 3% is programmed in for 2023. That's in accordance with the CBA. And then for non-union, there's a placeholder of 3%, just we're doing the same across the board. And that'll go ultimately to the whole village board for your approval. So we are including in the forecast salaries for all full and part-time seasonal employees, increases in accordance with contract. Forecast includes not so much an attrition factor anymore, it's just saying a vacancy factor, because we know that even though we have a certain number of authorized positions, we're just not getting there. So there is programmed in the forecast some reductions in our salary projections because we know that we have some salary savings. Some of that is eaten up by overtime, admittedly, but we are still saving just given the number of vacancies that we've had. Okay, I don't expect you to read this on this slide, but it is in the packet. It's a lot easier to read. Just talking, I'm just going to touch on a few of these because we've talked a lot about these already. Just iterative assumptions that we're taking into account as we're looking at revenue and expenditure projections as we go forward, potential risks, potential things that we can encounter in the next 5 years, market trends, obviously market volatility, that puts us particularly at risk in the police pension fund and what our contributions could be going forward. State of Illinois, county, federal legislation, any changes or mandates that are coming down from them. We still have about 19% of our general fund revenue that flows through the state. So we are particularly vulnerable to any changes that they make that might delay revenue or reduce revenue going forward. Supply chain disruptions we've talked about already, staffing shortages in the labor market, kind of just touched on that with expenditures. We are continuing to have trouble with vacancies, with overtime, and trying to fill those positions. The potential for a recession and the impacts of inflation are really, have always been there, but they're particularly highlighted in this budget. And I think that's going to be a focus of us, particularly as we project 2023 of where that's going to be, and will likely change up until the point that the budget is adopted based off of how things have been going.
And then again after that too.
Yeah, as soon as it's printed, it'll
Right.
change again.
Right.
So I have to touch on here. Those are really the major factors. Again, this is tiny, but this is in the packet. We talked a little bit about property taxes. We are seeing building permits kind of leveling off, but that's really subject to building permit activity. So we have some conservative estimates going out into the next 5 years. Our telecommunications tax, right now, that's $175,000 in the general fund. We're projecting that to continue to decline. It's been declining for years, so that's carried out through the remainder of the forecast. Parking fees have been a really wild thing to try to predict with return to the office, stay from home. We are starting to see that revenue recover, but it's nowhere near it was pre-pandemic. I'm sure you can see that just from the commuter parking fees. So that's going to continue to be difficult to predict, but we are assuming that a certain percentage of employees will return to the office over the next 5 years. On a local level, we talked a little bit about water revenue. That's largely dependent on where the CIP lands, and the garbage services will be based off of that contract. We're not proposing any vehicle license fees at this point, any change in that. It's about $250,000 in the general fund that we budget for, but we have started to see that decline a little bit. That's consistent with what we're seeing in other municipalities. We're getting inquiries and surveys about it. I don't know if it's that people are not driving as much or if they're just not complying as much, but that's something that we'll be looking at as part of the comprehensive fee survey that we're doing. And that is something that will come before the board in November with our recommendations after we expand that survey to additional communities and additional fees that we haven't analyzed before. Let's see. Expenditure assumptions, we talked a little bit about this. Our debt service levels will depend on the CIP. We had possible issues earmarked in 24, 26, and 27. Those are general obligation bond issues, so that does not include the water. But I do have payments programmed into that of what we were planning on in CIP, but again, that will shift based off of what we recommend. And then commodities and services are projected out using those CPI projections. But we'll obviously have to take a closer look at that as we start to go through each of the department budgets, because that can vary widely as well. Okay. In terms of next steps, the full financial forecast discussion will be in October. We're hoping we'll have a lot more information for you to help us make more informed decisions when the draft budget comes before you in November. So if you have any feedback this evening, we'll take the feedback that you gave already and incorporate that into discussion. And then we'll also incorporate the CIP recommendations into the forecast for October, so that you can see the whole picture. Happy to answer any questions.
When are we doing the budgeting?
The budget will get presented in November. I think it's November 15th and 17th are the two dates that are kind of earmarked for that presentation. We'll get you guys the full draft budget on the 9th of November. So you'll have almost a week with it before our first presentation. We may be able to get through the whole thing on the 15th, which is the regular finance committee date.
We should plan on like a 5-hour marathon kind of.
Right. And if what we've done in the past is we've kind of earmarked the committee of the whole time as well if we need it, but we'll probably plan a 5 o'clock start for that finance committee meeting and maybe run through till 10 to get it done if we can. And usually, actually, we've been able to do that. So, but that's the plan. That'll include everything. That's CIP, that's full operating budget. We're upstairs. Full operating budget, so.
Okay, are there any other items for discussion? Hearing none, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? All right, thanks.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, everybody, for the presentation. Very helpful.